Today's Citizens Academy video is about the city's budget process. By the time we're done with this video, hopefully you'll understand a little bit more about the city's budget process that helps us plan and prepare the next year's budget. So let's dive right in. As you can see by this chart behind me, there's quite a few steps that it takes to plan and prepare the city's annual budget. And you can also note that the process begins really at the beginning of the year and goes almost through the entire year, which means budget process, or budget season, as we like to call it, really doesn't end in municipal governments. So we begin at the top, which is from February to March. The city is submitting and preparing capital improvement project requests. These things could deal with anything from water line replacements to sewer line replacements, even some street replacements. Departments submit those requests based upon a needs assessment and various projects that they know that need to be done. And then those projects will then get evaluated and prioritized beginning in April. The CIP will eventually be recommended for approval in the city's annual budget process for the following year. So the initial part is really preparing the information, evaluating them, and prioritizing those projects for consideration in the 5-year capital improvement process. We've prepared a separate video in our Academy videos so you can understand a little bit more about this process and what it all entails. Then, beginning in April through May, the city begins to prepare its annual operating budget. The annual operating budget is comprised of many parts, but one key component is personnel budgets, which you can see right here. In fact, a very large percentage of the city's overall budget is for personnel. And if you think about it, this makes sense because most of our services are provided by people. Police department services, for example, are provided directly by police officers. Fire protection is provided by firefighters. Parks are maintained by parks personnel, etc., etc. In fact, most of our operations cannot be done very easily by automation, which is good because we're providing quality jobs for our community, and we're also providing jobs with faces so that as those folks are working in your community and providing services to you as citizens, you can get to know those folks and come to appreciate the work that they do. But as I mentioned, beginning in the early parts of the year, we begin putting together our personnel budgets. Now, this entails a number of things. Number one, we're going to be looking at our services for the upcoming year to determine if we need to make any changes that may affect personnel. Do we want to reclassify a position so that so they'll be focused on doing a different task, which may move them on the pay scale? Or maybe we need to add another position to the department to provide more services or to enhance the existing services that we're providing. Of course, any service change that we make will probably have a personnel change, and personnel changes come with costs. As you can imagine, personnel changes require us to pay wages, but we also pay benefits, we also pay pension, health insurance, a whole number of things that go into the ultimate cost of personnel. So we're not only looking at services and what we anticipate they're going to be for the upcoming year, but we're also looking at our needs and trying to determine if those needs and changes in the community are going to impact the services that we're going to be providing. Once that's done, we put that all into a spreadsheet and begin to project what those costs are likely going to look like for the next 18 months. I say 18 months because, again, we're projecting out what those costs are going to be beginning in April and May for the following year. So once that's done, because personnel makes up a large percentage of our budgets, we then feed that into our department operating budgets so they can provide a clear and concise budget projection for what services are going to look like for the next year and what their department will request for the upcoming budget cycle. So right below that, you can see the department operating budget development. Department directors will take that information from their personnel budgets and they'll begin to look at their total budget to figure out what resources they're going to request for the upcoming year. This may mean that they're going to look at their utility line item, for example, and they're going to project that they might need some more money because utility costs have gone up. Or they might look at other costs, like, for example, maybe they are anticipating the need for additional training because of state mandates or a federal requirement that might be coming down the pike that they now have to consider as part of their budget. Again, because the budget is looking out 18 or more months in advance, department directors and their staff are trying to provide the best understanding of what the budget will look like to continue the department's operations. It's also at this point in the year that departments will also look at potential revenue sources if the department has revenue sources that are attributed to their services. For example, some departments charge fees for services, and they can look at those fees to determine if adjustments are needed to help come up with resources to meet their budget's anticipated requests. Another thing that may happen during this time of year is departments will also look at cost controls to help keep their budgets as tight as possible. This is necessary for a number of things, but most importantly, to help ensure that our tax requests are in line with needs and are kept under control so that we aren't asking for something that is over exuberant. Sometimes, however, costs cannot be controlled as much as we would like, and we do have to ask for revenue increases, sometimes in the form of tax increases. Departments complete their operating budgets and then submit those for consideration in the overall city budget. Those budget requests get submitted to the city's finance director, assistant city manager, as well as the city manager. And that information begins to be assembled into a package, which we would consider a draft operating budget. It is at this point in time that the city manager and finance director, assistant city manager will meet with department directors to discuss the requests for the upcoming year, to ask any questions that may explain anomalies or special requests, or just to get a general idea of what the department is thinking about for the upcoming cycle. It's also at this point in time where budgets might be cut or reduced, or certain limitations may be placed on the budgets in order to make the entire budget fit within a certain amount. Once that's done, the city manager now has a draft budget that can then be considered for budget work session discussions with the city commission in order to get closer to a final budget package for consideration in the final budget. But before we get to that, we have to consider a couple of other things. Beginning in June, the county provides the city with its revenue neutral rate. The revenue neutral rate is a statutory requirement that the state of Kansas has for municipalities. In essence, what it is it is a mill levy that will bring in the same amount of revenue as the prior year. In order to exceed the revenue neutral rate, cities are required to follow a process that involves a public notice as well as a public hearing informing the community that the city intends to exceed the revenue neutral rate, as well as providing an opportunity for the public to provide comments back to the city, especially with respect to objections for any increases to the rate that would exceed the revenue neutral rate. The intent of this legislation is to help ensure that cities have a good reason for exceeding the revenue neutral rate and provide the community with an opportunity to provide feedback and objections to the commission for consideration before they make this decision. As I mentioned, the city gets that revenue neutral rate from the county in June, and this is really, for the most part, the last major component that gets inserted into the budget draft before we can really begin to take formal discussions on the budget. And it is at this point in time that we begin to receive public input on the draft budget. And we're going to use a special tool called Balancing Act this year to help provide the community with a great opportunity to provide input with respect to the city's draft budget, which will ultimately go into the proposed budget and then into the final adopted budget. So your input this year will be very vital in helping us understand what the community's priorities are for the annual operating budget. We'll have a number of options available to you, including adjusting revenues and expenses to help you submit your preferred budget for consideration with the City Commission. Once we assemble all the public input, we'll then develop a couple of options for the City Commission to consider, and we'll discuss those at budget work sessions that will begin in June. Budget work sessions are a great opportunity to sit down with the Commission in an informal setting and to discuss what departments are requesting and what the resources will look like for the upcoming budget year to enable the Commission to make budget decisions for the upcoming budget. These budget work sessions are generally organized by fund, although they can also be arranged by function, and provide an opportunity for the Commission to get an understanding of each department's budget as well as each fund so they can make the most informed decision with respect to the annual operating budget. These work sessions will go through the month of June and actually continue through July and potentially even into August, depending on what additional information the City Commission would like to see to help inform it on its decision-making process. Beginning in July, the City Commission will set the revenue neutral rate and budget hearings. This means that the City Commission will actually take formal action and determine a date and time at which the revenue neutral rate and budget hearings will take place. To be clear, there are two separate hearings, although they generally take place on the same day. The revenue neutral rate hearing will provide an opportunity for the public to provide objections and feedback with respect to the city's intent to exceed the revenue neutral rate. Now, in some cases, the city may not have an intent to exceed the revenue neutral rate. Depending on the budget year, it may not be seeking to exceed the revenue neutral rate. In years where it is intending to exceed the revenue neutral rate, there will be a hearing and the public will be informed in advance of that hearing by mailers sent out by the county. That mailer will have not only the city's, but all of the other taxing jurisdictions' intents to exceed the revenue neutral rate, as well as their hearing date, time, and location, so you as an informed taxpayer can attend and voice your objections to any of those respective hearings. We will also have our budget hearing, which is generally the same day as the revenue neutral hearing as well. The budget hearing is an opportunity for the public to voice any concerns or objections, or just provide general feedback on the proposed budget. It's a great opportunity for the public to hear about the proposed budget, and then it's an opportunity to provide comments with respect to what is being proposed. The comments don't necessarily have to be about any tax increases, but could be about things like how the city is intending to spend dollars, utility rate increases, other revenue increases, or general expenses. So you could provide really any kind of comment you would like about the budget during the budget hearing. But in July, these hearing dates are only being set, and generally speaking, the city has those hearings in September, which we'll get to in just a moment in the process. If the city is planning to or anticipates exceeding the revenue neutral rate, it must adopt an intent to exceed the revenue neutral rate. And the city anticipates this happening in July. Once this is done, that triggers the county to send out the notices to each taxpayer within the city, informing them of the city's intent to exceed the revenue neutral rate, as well as the amount that is projected, and again, when the hearing will take place, on the date and time and location, so that you as a taxpayer can voice any objections you may have to that. And then, of course, in July, we continue to have budget work sessions based upon not only commission feedback, but also based on modifications and changes on community feedback and general changes that may happen throughout that budget process. Then beginning in August, the city has to notify the taxpayers by publishing the dates of the public hearings for the budget and the revenue neutral rate, and we will do that on our city website and our newspaper so that citizens can have multiple opportunities to understand when these hearings will take place. Again, there will be 3 venues that you can get this information. taxpayers will receive a mailer from the county for any taxing jurisdiction that is intending to exceed the revenue neutral rate. So that will be the first notification. The second notification opportunity is on the city's website at eldoks.com. The third notification opportunity is on the city's newspaper, which is the Butler Times-Gazette. And of course, there is also a fourth option or opportunity, which will also be the city's social media outlets. So, for example, our Facebook feed and our Instagram and all of our social media outlets. The hope is that you'll have plenty of opportunities to understand when these hearings will take place so that you as a taxpayer, if you have objections or maybe you have accolades that you'd like to communicate to the commission, you'll have that information so that you can put that on your calendar and make plans to attend these hearings. Then finally in September, we'll actually have the budget and revenue neutral rate hearings as advertised. The City Commission will take the information that they receive from those hearings and from other informal communications they've received from the public, and they will use that to help make their decision with respect to the annual budget. So it could be that some of the comments that they receive from the public, the City Commission then directs the city manager, myself, to make modifications to the budget as proposed before it is finalized and adopted for consideration. So please bear in mind that any input and comments that you have do have influence on the final adopted budget. After the hearing, the City Commission considers the final budget for adoption, and once it's adopted, the City Commission signs the certified budget forms that are then sent to the county, and then the county takes that information and assesses property taxes based upon the mill rate and sends out tax statement number 1. So you will receive your tax statement number 1 in December, and that payment will be due and payable shortly thereafter. Then, of course, January 1st comes around, which is when the city's calendar year and budget year actually begins. Some taxing jurisdictions' taxing year begins in July, but the city is a calendar year, meaning that our budget year is from January 1st to December 31st. So, effective January 1st, our adopted budget begins, and we can begin to spend the money that has been authorized as part of the annual budget. Then in May, taxpayers will receive tax statement number 2, which again will be payable shortly thereafter. And that's basically the process for the annual budget process. Now, I should note a couple of important considerations with respect to the budget. This whole process is very important to the city for establishing its authorized budget amount. What that means is that when the city adopts a budget, it is adopting an authorized budget amount. That means that the city cannot exceed the amount that is authorized under that budget without going through another process. So let me put this in terms you can see. So the City Commission could authorize a budget of $17.5 million. This is close to what our general fund budget is, although the city has several other funds, but for illustration purposes, I'm just going to talk about the general fund for a minute. So if the city adopts the budget and authorizes $17.5 million, the city cannot spend more than the $17.5 million without first going back through a similar process by which the city would have to notify the public and conduct a public hearing, although it would not be able to modify the mill levy at that point in time. So let's say that the city needs to spend $19 million for whatever reason. Maybe it needs to spend some additional dollars due to a project, or because it has some cash reserves that it needs to spend on a specific piece of equipment that broke and that's critical for public infrastructure needs. If the city has the money in the bank and that money is not budgeted, for example, then the City Commission can publish notice of a public hearing, conduct a public hearing, and then authorize or amend the budget from $17.5 million to $19 million. And and this would give the city the ability to spend the additional dollars it would need to do the project. Remember, the city is trying to do its budget 18 months in advance. And so invariably, there's going to be some things that may come up that we just could not anticipate. Or there could be a situation like a natural disaster or an emergency that comes up, or again, maybe a piece of equipment breaks that we could not anticipate 18 months prior. So as much as we try to get our authorized budget number to be as close as possible, sometimes things just happen and we have to come back and amend the budget to a higher number. Again, this doesn't mean that we're going to have higher taxes in the middle of the year. The city cannot adjust the mill levy. It can only amend the amount of money that was authorized for expenditure. So once the budget is amended, the city can then exceed the previously authorized number without having a budget violation per state law. Then, in essence, what happens is the following year, we start right back over at the beginning and continue as we did. So that is, in a nutshell, the city's annual budget process. Summarize the city's annual budget process. Hopefully, you've learned a little bit more about how the city goes through that process and some of the considerations that are needed in order for us to prepare and finalize our annual budget. Hopefully, you also know a little bit more about some of the opportunities that the public has to provide public comments to the public, to the City Commission, to help inform and educate their decision-making process. Stay tuned on our city's website and social media outlets throughout the year to learn more about opportunities for you to engage in the budget process, as well as opportunities for you to provide input directly to the City Commission to help them make a good decision for our annual budget process. Thank you for watching. See you next time.